I'm still a sucker for hand-drawn visuals in video games. I think there's some subconscious appreciation I have for the artistry that goes into hand animating. Unfortunately, the last metroidvania with hand-drawn visuals I played wasn't the best. So even though my interest was piqued with Cookie Cutter, it would be dishonest to not admit I was hoping that it would be a better experience than last time. Right from the start, Cookie Cutter wastes no time building the world and conflict surrounding the protagonist's motivation. Everything began with a mysterious energy, the Void, that suddenly appeared and began to grow into a sprawling, complex network that would become known as the Megastructure. The Infonet Corporation was the first group to lead an expedition and return, announcing that they had discovered a means of preserving souls in immortal, robotic constructs called Denzels. But as is always the case in cyberpunk dystopias, the true nature of the Denzels was sinister. Upon discovering the purpose of the Denzels, to be mechanical servants of the Infonet Corporation, Chief Engineer Shinji Fallon defected from the company to fight against their tyranny, creating her own Denzel named Cherry. When Infonet locates Shinji to reclaim their lost asset, Cherry sets off on a warpath to rescue her creator. Cookie Cutter is a side-scrolling, beat-em-up style metroidvania that takes place within the megastructure. Controls are typical of the side-scrolling genre, and combat consists of light attacks that build void energy, which can be spent on heavy attacks using collectible weapons or special abilities that you unlock throughout the game. Your defensive options are also typical: a jump, an invincible dodge roll, and a parry. Enemies all have health, which is reduced by attacks, and grit, which is reduced by parrying. When an enemy's health is low enough or their grit reaches 0, a finisher can be executed by pressing the heavy attack button. These finishers instantly kill the enemy, dropping health and void energy, and each enemy type has a unique animation for the execution, which is a nice touch. One thing to note is that the parry window is incredibly small, and the tutorial explicitly spends time telling you that it's entirely optional. In Cookie Cutter, there are bosses that also have health and grit values, but they are scaled much higher than normal enemies. With bosses, you're usually better off focusing on damage and evasion instead of trying to parry their high damage attacks. Acting as collectibles in Cookie Cutter are rewards such as chests with money or upgrade materials, Denzel components, and energy cells. As you obtain components, you can equip them at Denzel stations around the megastructure to further customize Cherry's stats and abilities. Equipping components uses an energy system where each component has a specific cost, and you have a pool of energy that can be increased by finding energy cells. There's also a very light crafting/upgrade element to Cookie Cutter, where enemies will drop specific items that can be used to upgrade components or weapons to increase their effectiveness. I can't overstate that Cookie Cutter has a very strong start. You're immediately presented with a premise that has gravity to it, and you're thrust into the game as soon as it's established. However, there are cracks that begin to appear and grow as time goes on. One example is how the combat changes. Initially, your uppercuts and heavy attacks will knock back and stagger enemies, enabling you to juggle and combo them before sealing the deal with a finisher. With a variety of powers and weapons that you unlock as you progress, combat feels interesting and engaging as you become familiar with the game. But once you are familiar, most enemies can be stun-locked with little to no threat of a counterattack, which quickly makes combat trivial and disengaging. Contributing even more to this downward trajectory is very predictable enemy AI and some misleading enemy attack hitboxes. There were several times where enemies would hit me even though their attack was in the opposite direction, and sometimes I would be damaged by lingering hitboxes that were no longer visible. Exploration also quickly begins to feel lackluster. Objectives that direct you toward specific zones are often unrelated to the main narrative, and the map, while functional, has its own issues. Some collectibles are not removed after collection, and due to how the map reveals itself as you explore, hidden caches are often visible on the map before you've actually found them, damaging the satisfaction of locating them in the first place. Cookie Cutter also leans far too heavily on the "you're now locked in a room, defeat waves of enemies to progress" scenario. While this could feel fine in moderation, it happens much too frequently to the point where I would recognize when it was coming. Later zones try to lean more into platforming, and, to put it bluntly, platforming in Cookie Cutter feels terrible. There's only one jump height, and you have little to no aerial control because your momentum continues in the direction you're traveling when you jump. Later in the game, you do unlock an invincible air dash, but it's mainly used for longer jumps in the direction you're moving, or bailing out of bad jumps because you can't drift backwards. There's also the introduction of hazards that instantly kill you around the midpoint of the game, and these feel wildly out of place with the aerial control being so limited, and earlier hazards not exhibiting this behavior. But what I think is the biggest pain point with Cookie Cutter is that the theme and narrative doesn't feel as baked into the game as it could be. At the beginning, the premise and tone are immediately set in an intensely in-your-face way, which I think is well executed, but the juvenile, punk rock attitude that follows clashes with this initial serious tone. Further creating a tonal disconnect is the fact that the punk rock aesthetic that Cherry exhibits is rarely extended beyond NPC dialogue and Cherry's animations. Enemy and level designs are relatively generic, and most of your time is spent exploring similar metal corridors and fighting similar types of enemies. This results in the theme effectively disappearing until you talk to one of the handful of NPCs in the game, which makes conversation extremely jarring where jokes fall flat and characters are immediately annoying due to tactless, heavy-handed writing around what could just be a tongue-in-cheek quirk. At the end of the day, Cookie Cutter is an okay game, but I find it hard to recommend. The narrative and themes surrounding Cookie Cutter fall into the background, and while the combat seems promising at the start, it becomes trivial early into the runtime. Sadly, there was very little that motivated me to keep coming back to Cookie Cutter outside of the desire to finish it for this review. It's certainly a game that has some interesting ideas, but I think it's lacking the polish to make those ideas stand out in a meaningful way. Thanks for watching, take care, and remember, keep having fun.